Walter Brennan had spent 31 years learning how to be invisible. Not in the literal sense. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall, with the kind of broad shoulders that turned heads in doorways. His invisibility was quieter. It lived in the way his son, Julian, looked through him during family dinners. In the way Julian's fiancée, Priya, addressed every question to Walter's wife, Marlene. In the way the wedding invitations had been mailed 3 weeks ago, and Walter's name was not on the guest list. He discovered this on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when the leaves outside his print shop were the color of old bruises. Marlene had left her tablet on the kitchen counter, and a notification had blinked across the screen. Julian and Priya wedding guest list final. XLSX had been updated. Walter did not consider himself a snoop, but the word final carried a kind of gravitational pull, and before he knew it, he had opened the file. 312 names. His sister, Lorraine, his brother-in-law, Carl, his next-door neighbor of 6 months, Mrs. Gable, even the teenager who mowed Julian's lawn twice a summer, but not Walter, not Dad, not Father. He scrolled twice, then 3 times, because the human brain is not designed to accept certain absences. The 4th scroll was the hardest. That was when he stopped looking for his name and started looking for the space where it should have been. The space was not empty. It was filled with a name he did not recognize, Marcus Webb +1. Walter closed the tablet. He made himself a cup of coffee, black, the way he had drunk it since 1987, when his own father had taught him that sugar was for children and cream was for people who didn't like the taste of reality. He sat at the kitchen table and watched the steam rise. Marlene was at work. Julian was at his architecture firm across town. Priya was, presumably, somewhere selecting centerpieces or tasting cake or doing whatever it was that engaged couples did when they were busy erasing a father from the most important day of his son's life. He should have been angry. That was what the book said. That was what the late-night talk shows joked about, the dramatic confrontation, the slammed door, the tearful apology. But Walter felt something colder. He felt the slow, creeping certainty that this had not happened suddenly. This was not a wound. It was an amputation that had been performed one small cut at a time over decades, and he had simply failed to notice until there was nothing left to sever. 31 years earlier, Walter had been 22 years old, working the night shift at a truck stop outside of Bozeman, Montana, when Marlene had walked in with a newborn wrapped in a yellow blanket. She had been 17. She had been crying. The baby had been 2 weeks old, and his name was not yet Julian. It was nothing. It was a blank space on a birth certificate that Marlene had been too afraid to fill out alone. Walter had not been a hero that night. He had not planned to become a father. He had been saving money for a welding certification, dreaming of pipeline work in North Dakota, where the money was good and the loneliness was better. But Marlene had looked at him across the counter, grease-stained, exhausted, holding a child who could not have weighed more than a bag of flour, and she had said, "I don't know what to do." And Walter, who had never known what to do about anything, had said, "Sit down. I'll make you something to eat." That was the beginning. Not a grand romantic gesture, not a proposal under fireworks, just eggs over easy and toast with butter, and a promise that he would drive her to the county clerk's office in the morning. He had signed the birth certificate as the father. He had given the baby his last name. He had told everyone who asked that Julian was his son, and after a while he stopped needing to say it at all. It became true in the way that mountains become mountains, not because someone declared it, but because it was. He had been a good father, not a perfect one, he knew that. He had worked too much. He had missed school plays and parent-teacher conferences. He had once forgotten to pick Julian up from soccer practice, and the boy had walked 2 miles home in the rain, and Walter had found him sitting on the front porch, shivering, too proud to use the key that hung around his neck. Julian had not spoken to him for a week after that. Walter had bought him a new video game as an apology, and Julian had played it for 3 days straight, and they had never discussed the rain or the 2 miles or the pride that ran so deep in both of them that it might as well have been a shared blood type. but he had shown up for the important things. Julian's first broken arm. Walter had driven 80 miles an hour to the emergency room, blown through 2 stop signs, and sat in the waiting room for 6 hours because the doctors would not let him into the operating room. Julian's high school graduation. Walter had taken the day off for the first time in 4 years, had worn a tie that he had to ask Marlene how to knot, had clapped so hard that his palms were raw. Julian's acceptance letter to architecture school. Walter had framed it and hung it in the print shop, right next to the register, so that every customer who came in could see it. But somewhere along the way, the thread had frayed. It happened slowly. That was the cruelest part. If Julian had yelled, if he had thrown a punch, if he had done anything dramatic, Walter would have known how to respond. He was good with loud problems. He had spent 20 years as a volunteer firefighter, had run into burning buildings while other men ran out. But Julian's rejection was a quiet thing. It was the way his eyes slid past Walter during Thanksgiving dinner. It was the way he laughed at Priya's jokes, and then, when Walter told a joke, looked down at his plate as if he had not heard. It was the way he called Marlene every Sunday without fail, while Walter's phone remained silent except for spam calls and appointment reminders. Walter had told himself it was just Julian's personality. Some boys were not close with their fathers. Some boys needed space. Some boys grew into men who kept their emotions locked in a drawer somewhere, and that was fine, that was normal, that was the way things were. But the wedding invitation, or rather, the absence of it, pried open that drawer and revealed it was empty. He sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours, drinking 3 cups of coffee, watching the light shift across the linoleum floor. Then he stood up, rinsed his mug, and went back to the print shop. He had orders to fill. He had business cards to typeset and flyers to fold and a life to continue living, because that was what you did when your son erased you from his wedding. You folded flyers. You lined up margins. You pretended that your hands were not shaking. Marlene came home at 6:15. She found him in the garage, sanding a rocking chair he had been restoring for 7 months. The chair was a family heirloom, his grandmother's, and he had stripped it down to the bare wood twice, searching for something he could not name. "You saw the guest list," she said, not a question. Walter did not stop sanding. "I saw it." She stood in the doorway, holding her purse against her chest like a shield. She was 52, with gray streaks in her dark hair and the kind of tiredness that came from being the peacekeeper in a family that had declared a Cold War years ago. "He didn't mean for you to see it like that." "How did he mean for me to see it?" "By registered mail." "Walter." "There are 312 names on that list, Marlene. 312. The kid who mows his lawn is on there. Marcus Webb is on there. Marcus Webb +1. But not me, not his father, not the man who signed his birth certificate when he was 2 weeks old and weighed less than a bag of flour." Marlene's face crumpled, but only for a moment. She had learned over the years to hide her sadness behind efficiency. "Julian wants to talk to you." "Does he?" "He's coming over Friday, just the 2 of you." Walter stopped sanding. He looked at the rocking chair, at the grain of the wood, at the imperfections he had been trying to smooth away for months. "What good will talking do?" "I don't know," Marlene said, "but you owe it to him to try." "I owe it to him." Walter set the sandpaper down. "I owe him 31 years of child support I never complained about. I owe him the college tuition I paid by working double shifts. I owe him the car I sold so he could have a down payment on his first apartment. I owe him everything, apparently. And what does he owe me?" Marlene did not answer. She turned and walked back into the house, and Walter heard her open the refrigerator, heard the clink of a glass, heard the quiet sound of her crying with the faucet running so he would not have to listen. Friday arrived like a storm that had been forecast for days but still managed to surprise everyone. Walter spent the morning at the print shop, running the presses, inhaling the smell of ink and paper. He had always found comfort in the rhythm of the machines, the press of the roller, the slide of the paper, the finality of a perfect impression. But that morning, nothing felt final. Everything felt suspended, like a sentence that had not yet reached its verb. Julian arrived at 4 o'clock. He drove a silver sedan, the kind of car that signaled success without shouting about it. He was 31, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's height. He walked up the driveway with his hands in his pockets, and for a moment, just a moment, Walter saw the boy who had walked 2 miles in the rain rather than use his key. They sat in the garage. Walter had set up 2 folding chairs facing the rocking chair, because he did not know what else to do with the space between them. Julian looked at the rocking chair but did not comment on it. He looked at his father but did not meet his eyes. "I need to tell you something," Julian said. Walter nodded. He had learned in the fire service that the worst thing you could do to a person in crisis was interrupt. You let them speak. You let the words come out, no matter how much they burned. "You're not my biological father," Julian said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Walter had known this, of course. He had known it from the moment Marlene walked into the truck stop with a yellow blanket and a baby who did not look like anyone. But knowing something and hearing it spoken aloud are 2 different things. Knowing is a thought. Hearing is an event. "I know," Walter said. Julian's head snapped up. "You knew." "I was there when your mother signed the birth certificate. I was the one who told her to put my name down. She didn't ask me to." "Then why didn't you ever tell me?" Walter considered the question. He had asked himself the same thing many times over many years. The answer was complicated, but complicated answers were not what the moment required. "Because I was afraid," he said. "I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you would stop being my son, and I didn't know how to be anything other than your father." Julian's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No," Walter agreed. It was cowardly, and I'm sorry." The apology seemed to confuse Julian. He had come prepared for a fight. Walter could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the way he kept his hands clenched into fists. He had expected denial, anger, deflection. He had not expected a man in a greasy apron to say "I'm sorry" and mean it. "My biological father," Julian said slowly, "reached out to me 6 months ago." Walter felt something crack in his chest. Not his heart. The heart was a muscle, and muscles could heal. It was something deeper, something that did not have a name. "His name is Marcus Webb," Julian continued. "He was 17 when my mother got pregnant. He panicked. He ran. He's been living in Seattle for the last 20 years, and he says he's been looking for me since he turned 25. He says he was too ashamed to reach out sooner. He says he wants to make things right." Walter remembered the name from the guest list. Marcus Webb +1. He had assumed it was a coworker, a college friend, someone innocuous. He had not assumed it was the ghost that had been haunting his marriage for 3 decades. "And making things right," Walter said carefully, "means walking you down the aisle at your wedding." Julian flinched. "How did you know about that?" "You put him on the guest list. +1. I assumed the +1 was your mother." "It was. So he's taking my place." Julian stood up. The folding chair clattered against the concrete floor. "He's not taking anything. You were never supposed to have that place. You knew you weren't my real father. You knew it the whole time. And you let me believe, you let everyone believe, that you were something you're not." Walter stood up too. He was taller than Julian, though not by much. "I was the one who held you when you had nightmares. I was the one who taught you to ride a bike. I was the one who sat in the emergency room for 6 hours while they put a cast on your arm. I may not have given you my blood, but I gave you everything else. And if that doesn't make me your real father, then I don't know what the word means." Julian's eyes were wet, but he blinked the tears away. "You gave me a lie." "I gave you a life. You gave me a life built on a lie." They stood facing each other. 2 men who looked enough alike to be mistaken for family, separated by something that had nothing to do with DNA and everything to do with the stories they told themselves about who they were. Julian was the first to look away. He picked up his folding chair and leaned it against the wall. He walked to the door of the garage and stopped with his hand on the frame. "I'm not asking you to come to the wedding," he said. "I'm telling you, please don't come. It will be easier for everyone if you're not there." And then he was gone. The silver sedan pulled out of the driveway, turned left at the stop sign, and disappeared into the October afternoon. Walter stood in the garage for a long time, listening to the silence. Then he sat back down in his folding chair, picked up the sandpaper, and went back to work on the rocking chair. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Walter's life. He got up at 5:30 every morning, went to the print shop, folded flyers, typeset business cards, and came home at 6. He ate dinner with Marlene, who had stopped crying with the faucet running and had started crying openly, which was somehow worse. They did not talk about Julian. They talked about the weather, about the neighbors, about the cat that had started hanging around the back porch. They talked about everything except the empty chair at the table where their son used to sit. Walter did not tell anyone about the conversation in the garage. Not his sister, Lorraine, who would have driven across town to yell at Julian on his behalf. Not his friend Dave from the fire department, who would have said something unhelpful like blood is thicker than water without understanding that the full proverb was the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. Not even his therapist, because Walter did not have a therapist, though Marlene had been suggesting he get one for years. Instead, he wrote letters. He had always been a writer, though he never admitted it. In the back of his closet, hidden in a shoebox beneath a pile of old tax returns, there were dozens of notebooks filled with half-finished stories and abandoned poems. He had never shown them to anyone. He had never tried to publish them. Writing was not a hobby or a vocation. It was a way of talking to himself without feeling crazy. But these letters were different. They were addressed to Julian. They were not meant to be sent. He told himself that from the beginning. They were simply a way of saying the things he could not say aloud, of arranging his thoughts into sentences that made sense. "Dear Julian," the first letter began. "I am writing this on a Tuesday. The print shop is slow. I have folded 400 flyers for a grocery store that is going out of business, which seems like a metaphor for something, though I'm not sure what. I want you to know that I am not angry about Marcus. I am angry about other things: the rain, the soccer practice, the 2 miles you walked because you were too proud to use your key. I am angry about the school plays I missed and the parent-teacher conferences I forgot. I am angry at myself mostly. But I am not angry at you for wanting to know where you came from. That is not a thing a person should be angry about. I have thought a lot about what I would say to you if I could say anything, if there were no consequences, if you would actually listen, and I think it would be this: I am sorry I was not enough. Not because I failed as a father. I know I didn't fail. I was there. I showed up. I did the work, but I was not enough to make you feel like you belonged. And that is a failure that no amount of showing up can fix. Your biological father ran away. I stayed. But staying is not the same as belonging, is it? You can stand in a room for 31 years and still feel like a stranger. You can hold a child in your arms and still wonder if he is really yours. I have wondered that every day since you were 2 weeks old. I just never said it out loud. I should have told you the truth. That is the thing I am sorriest for. Not the lying. I never lied. I just omitted. I let you believe something that was not true because I was afraid that the truth would make you disappear. And now the truth has made you disappear anyway, so I have lost you twice, once to my silence and once to my voice. If Marcus Webb is a good man, I hope you will let him be your father. I hope he deserves you. I hope he stays. I hope he shows up for the things I missed and remembers the things I forgot. I hope he walks you down the aisle and stands at the altar and watches you marry the woman you love. I hope he does all of this, Julian, because you deserve a father who is not afraid. And I was afraid. I have always been afraid. I will not come to the wedding. You asked me not to, and I will honor that. But I want you to know that I will be thinking about you. I will be thinking about the boy who walked 2 miles in the rain. I will be thinking about the yellow blanket. I will be thinking about the truck stop in Bozeman and the eggs over easy and the 17-year-old girl who did not know what to do. I love you. I have loved you since before you had a name. That has nothing to do with blood. That has everything to do with a choice I made on a Tuesday night in October, 31 years ago, when I looked at a baby who weighed less than a bag of flour and decided that he was mine. Be happy. That is all I have ever wanted for you. Dad. He wrote 6 more letters over the next 3 weeks. He wrote about the first time Julian said Dada. He wrote